Hello everyone, welcome to the internally screening review of Noroi, The Curse. My name's Adam.
My name is Rupert.
And yeah, today we are continuing our Hooptober series of horror reviews with this, the 2005 found footage horror film. This is a wonderful find for me. This is in the sort of pseudo-documentary style in the like of the Blair Witch Project. It focuses on a man creating a documentary about paranormal activities going on in Japan, and he stumbles upon his sort of greatest case yet, in which he uncovers a downward spiral of all sorts of sinister and unholy events going on. I found it to be absolutely captivating. The way that it ties everything together, unlike say something like Blair Witch, where it's very much lo-fi and purely focused on one camera, this uses all sorts of different pieces of footage from different places pieced together in this kind of big jumbled up puzzle. I just found it to be very visually and narratively exciting. Rupert, what did you think of Noroi, The Curse?
I'm going to be honest, I didn't really know what to make of this film because, yeah, like you said, it's very different to something like, the classic thing that, all found footage films get compared to is the Blair Witch Project, which is an incredibly simple, straightforward, quite ambiguous horror film with, a pretty straightforward series of events, whereas this film is incredibly cryptic and has all of this kind of interesting lore that the characters sort of gradually uncover. It's not just, one camera, like you said. It then includes like excerpts from like TV, other bits of footage, and multiple cameras. And the things that go on in the film are way more complicated than whatever does happen in the Blair Witch Project. So yeah, it was very interesting, yet quite sort of disorienting and very unique, which I did enjoy. In terms of as a horror film, I don't think I was particularly scared or taken aback by its. I don't know how effective it was as a horror film, is what I'm trying to say, but it was definitely one of the most unique films I've seen. Particularly within J-horror, which tends to be, I guess quite straightforward in terms of tropes and things that happen. It wasn't just another paranormal J-horror film with, the same J-horror characters that you see over and over again from that kind of period. It was really interesting, but yeah, I I was sort of left scratching my head at points, and yeah, it was certainly. It was something. If you asked me to summarise the events of this film, like you said, it is like a jumbled up puzzle that, you're sort of given hints at how to complete, but the picture keeps changing, so you're sort of moving pieces around and trying to make sense of it. It was just so scrambled, and clearly on purpose. I'm not really criticising the film when I say that.
I didn't find that to be a problem with it at all, and
I'm not. I didn't either. Just to be clear.
Okay,
that's not my problem.
Well, okay. Well, in terms of what you said about it not being scary, I very much disagree. I found that it maintains like a really sinister air right from the get-go. I think I really enjoy the cheesy, quite self-aware introduction to the film, where it's like, this is the most shocking thing we've discovered, sort of thing, like it's some kind of video nasty that they've like uncovered from like the depths of like, kind of a film within a film, where it's pretending like this videotape is so shocking that the director went missing and shit like that. I really liked how it was kind of mocking its own silly framework. But then when you actually get into it, the narrative that is spun is like, I love the way they pick through different pieces, and a lot of things that start off separately. You get sort of footage of like a schoolgirl on TV completing tests to see if she has like telekinetic abilities and things like that, and then you've got like like an actress has a paranormal experience on a ghost TV program, and an awkward interaction with like a supposed psychic, and all these things feel like they're kind of existing completely separately from one another, and then they gradually all sort of come together and they all become like really key focal points of the movie. I thought that while understated, the main actor who plays the documentarian was just really solid. He really had this kind of believable sincerity to him, like he was really there to try and find this stuff out, and he was invested enough to make us feel invested as the audience, but not so over the top as to distract from the story he's trying to tell, which is a nice bit of detail again, because that is how a documentarian should be, kind of let the camera linger and show the audience what they're there to see, you know, like that they're trying to be as unintrusive as possible. And you know, as the story goes on and on and on, I found the atmosphere continued to ramp up in pressure.
I thought there were some really interesting things in this, like there's a quite kind of obviously satirical element to this film in the way it's generally presented. Yeah, like you said, when the film begins, it's kind of, oh, this is the uncovered footage thing, and that feels, yeah, sort of quite on the nose. I guess this was 2005, so this was post Blair Witch as well.
Right.
The footage of the kid on the show doing the psychic readings of what is, you know, in this box. Is it like they're in like a box, right? And then they take it out and they draw the picture, and you know, she manifests the water, and it's kind of clearly like satirizing, I guess, Japanese media. And then there's, like you said, the bit where the woman goes to visit the sort of conspiracy ghost schizophrenic man. You know, it's clearly that she's on like a talk show, and then she like goes to visit him, and she's like, look, I'm going to the house of the crazy person who speaks to ghosts. And it's like, yeah, it's clearly making a sort of pretty funny satirization, I guess, of Japanese media in particular, which I thought was, yeah, really interesting. I guess I don't know how much to spoil here, because the film, like you said, a lot of the elements that are sort of presented early on kind of move. So yeah, it feels quite sporadic at first, and then the film sort of gradually streamlines its elements down. I guess it moves to become more of a missing child story for a while.
Yeah, true.
And then sort of moves into them investigating this sort of ritual based cult as well. It almost becomes more of a traditional J-horror film as it goes on, because as it goes on, there's then this theme of a sort of a classic Japanese horror film theme of industrialization being sort of the cause of this sort of deep-rooted sickness in society, where the building of this dam has sort of displaced this traditional cult who might be behind sort of these various paranormal wrongdoings and this summoning of this demon. It feels very cohesive despite the fact that it's so all over the place, which I guess is very much to the film's credit, because that can't be an easy thing to achieve. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of the acting in this film or anything. I guess, yeah, the film just it just left me more confused than it did like scared or under its spell, I guess. Maybe I just reacted to this
what confused you about it? Like what was specific?
There was nothing in the film that like really confused me, sort of looking on it, looking back on it. I guess the film sort of has this, it builds this lore through these sort of exposition scenes of explaining this ritual and explaining this backstory behind this kind of uprooted society, and these rituals that they do, and then the characters sort of have to replicate these rituals. And there's these multiple sort of specific things about pigeons and dogs. And it almost feels quite sort of Ring-esque in that you can kind of tell that the characters are sort of doomed and they're kind of fucked whatever they do.
Yeah.
And there's certain characters who are clearly involved in some specific important way, like the mother of the young boy, who is clearly an important figure in some way, but the film kind of doesn't reveal it. And it's affecting specifically the woman who has the sort of ghost interaction early on, like you said, in this also very specific way. And the film kind of holds that information back, and then looking back on it, you can sort of kind of piece it together and make sense of it. It's hard for me to pin down what exactly about this film is frustrating to me, but I just feel like maybe I just need to watch it again, or I just didn't have the same visceral reaction. Yeah,
that's a shame, because I on the contrary was completely enthralled by it. Like from the word go, I loved the presentation of it, and you know, as we have been comparing it to the Blair Witch, I thought it did something really different with the genre, the subgenre. You know, you don't tend to see loads and loads of found footage horror. It's kind of a more, I guess
it's a bit dated now, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's only really a handful of really noteworthy films from it, I would say. You know, like the Wreck films and you know, Cloverfield, Paranormal Activity. Yeah, this did its very best to feel like a real film within a film, sort of thing. Like, I don't know, there was something very artful about its creation and clever about its inception that we've kind of gone over already. But
I do really respect that, because one of the problems with found footage horror films is that so many of them are basically just redos of the Blair Witch Project. You could even see something like Cloverfield as basically a redo of the Blair Witch Project in how it's done, in the exact structure where you have this sort of happy opening and then a small group of characters go through this sort of traumatic experience that then, you know, ends terribly, right? And there are so many found footage horror films that basically copy that exact structure, whereas this is like a very different approach. I guess it's almost similar. You could look at it if you kind of just took a macro look at it. It's a similar trajectory for the characters, but that's more of a horror film thing more than anything. But the way it's executed is definitely sort of unlike almost any found footage film I've ever seen before.
Yeah. No, and I love the sort of the motley crew of characters it ends up assembling. You know, we have our sort of I guess it's a trio, but it is also a quattro, you know, in so much as you have the silent cameraman character who is super important to it and yet barely ever has a line. I thought that was quite an interesting choice. Yeah, you have our main documentarian, you have the actress that had the supernatural experience, and then you have the mentally disturbed psychic character who's completely, I guess, broken by his interaction and his sixth sense for supernatural communication. His fear of every situation, that actor has such a difficult job, and I think he does it very well in being simultaneously constantly manic, constantly like twitching and scratching himself and kind of yelping in surprise and fear, but he dances just close enough to the edge where it's like it feels quite like genuinely disturbing and frightening for him, so that we ourselves feel his fear without it feeling completely overbearing and obnoxious, where it's just like, oh, his character is just constantly screaming all the time and whatever. Like, I could see a lesser film completely fucking that up.
He could have been annoying, and he never. I mean, he's kind of annoying, but not in a way that feels sort of detrimental to the film.
Yeah. I mean, he is intentionally supposed to be quite like an annoying figure, but he could have been completely unbearable. And like they make him inadvertently quite sympathetic, I think, because he's quite taken advantage of in so much.
No, I think he is. Yeah, he's very sympathetic.
Like you were saying earlier, like the first time you get to see the character is like when they do like the bit on TV where it's like, haha, this guy's crazy. Let's go in and talk to him now. And he's literally he's like, please, like. He doesn't know what to do. He's like,
he's just clearly in constant suffering.
Yeah, exactly. And like there are people taking advantage of him for his supposed like expertise, when it's not expertise, it's just like, yeah, suffering. And I really like the turn the film does to focus on the actress who's essentially being haunted, because the implication is that she is at the beginning of the process that a lot of the people he's interviewed previously have kind of been at the end of. And you know, often that end of the process seems to involve in someone's suicide, and so it's like there's like a ticking clock element in so much as curing her curse, right? Like, you know, the title of the film, and stopping her from getting to that point where she herself ends up the same way that all these other people have ended up. That builds to like a really, I really like where they move off to this town that has been displaced by the dam. Everything that takes place there is super sinister. I love that. It kind of gives me Ring vibes in the same way that when in the Ring, in order to sort of end their curse, they travel off to like a sort of distant place where they believe that the curse began, and like where the girl was born, and etc. Like there was kind of like a visual and similarly plotted way where the characters go on this big long journey to a very different location. I don't know, it kind of had that similar visual symmetry. No,
it's they sort of return to a rural area, because I mean, so much of J-horror seems like it's sort of defined by a sort of disgust or reluctance to embrace like the industrial world. It's clearly like quite a big thematic thread that runs through a lot of it. Because Japan was, you know, after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, was so quickly reindustrialized through investment by the US, and there's kind of like and obviously the US has now had a huge influence on the sort of cultural identity of Japan, despite that sort of collective trauma. I'm guessing that must be quite a sort of culturally jarring conflict to have, you know, where essentially your country is, you know, destroyed and humiliated, but then sort of rebuilt and invested in, at least partially, by, you know, the very people who bombed you. And there's also Japan was, you know, also just very quick to industrialize in general. And had such a sort of rich sort of rural tradition, you know, like, you know, with things like samurais and stuff, which still hold such a high, must be very important, I imagine, to, you know, the cultural identity of Japan. You know, there's so much sort of like rural imagery, and if you look at like a lot of the classical art of Japan, like the wilderness of Japan is like such a cultural touchstone. If you watch something like The Ring or Cure as well, or Shutter or Pulse, particularly Pulse actually, which is by the same director as Cure, it really utilises that kind of grey, dark environment to really maximise the horror, and it almost feels like it is sort of part of the horror. I guess Pulse is probably the closest example of a film I could draw that's similar to this. And you look at these films as well, something like The Ring, the horror is specifically like a technology. It's this like videotape, right? And in Pulse it's like this sort of internet virus that's also kind of a ghost. And in this, you know, I don't really the horror in this is a demon, but you know, they do that same thing where they return to the rural area. This happens in Cure as well. You remember he goes back to the house and meets with the hypnotist guy, and that's sort of where the film culminates essentially. It does seem to be sort of a common thread that runs through, although I guess the horror of this film, I don't really get a solid sense of what it is or what it represents.
I couldn't say for sure either, but you know, in terms of that parallel between the other films you mentioned, technology, rather than being the source of an evil or like the conduit for an evil, it's instead more like it acts as that parody or that kind of the insidious nature of like turning this traumatic and kind of this weird experience into sort of popcorn television for everyone to experience, and kind of pulling from even more popcorny television tropes. I guess it's more directly satirical than it is maybe technophobic or playing off the technology as a direct source of horror, but I definitely think there are still parallels to be drawn with that. The demon itself is more seems to be just a force of nature than anything else. As much as it is a really compelling mystery, I haven't yet come to the conclusion as to what that mystery really represents.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I'm struggling with, because with, you know, a more traditional J-horror film like The Ring, that it has a kind of almost similar to like each of the shorts in Kwaidan, feels like it has a very moralist, at the end it kind of has a moral zinger to it, if you know what I mean. The character does something early on and then has to pay for it later. That's the conflict and the resolution within the film. This felt like it was sort of almost going for that, because there is a similar character does something, is sort of pushing into things and then later pays the price element to it. But something like there are also films like Cure, where the character doesn't really do anything wrong, and if anything feels kind of powerless in this kind of unexplainable force that is just sort of suffocating them. However you want to interpret Cure, it's less of a straightforward moral story, like we were talking about, like the woman of the snow or the black hair. It's more sort of vague and ambiguous than that, and I think this film is kind of trying to make a middle ground, or at least it sort of exists in the middle ground between those two styles of storytelling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do kind of, I see what you're getting at. Do you want to jump into some pretty strong spoilers? Because I'm interested in talking about the very ending of the film,
Sure.
The culmination of everything. I'm interested to get your opinion on what you thought of like the big stinger reveals. Okay, right. So, say in the Blair Witch, the kind of beauty of the nature of the horror is it's so intensely psychological and implied. The characters seem to be experiencing some kind of very real horror, and yet we never see it. And for all we know, it could be completely internalized, completely just a group of people going insane.
Well, it's like the film equivalent of being in the dark and hearing some noises, but you don't really know what the noises are coming from. Right? Yeah.
And to some people, that completely turns them off the film, because it's
It's not intense enough.
Yeah, and there's like a kind of missing link in terms of you can't empathize with the characters. You're people often going into horror are looking for very specific, visceral, bump in the night, jump scare kind of, heart racing stuff, and something that plays more on a psychological and empathetic angle will not appeal to a lot of people, and I understand that, even if I don't agree with it. And I think the brilliance of that is they don't show the horror. That is left up to you to decide. This film kind of feels like it's building in that direction, that it is going to leave things more ambiguous and more nebulous as to whether the horror exists, and instead does choose to show you and outright goes bang, here is the answer to the mystery, here is what the curse is. So first things first is when they go up to this dam, the insane guy is suddenly drawn in a direction. He's like screaming and running up this hill, and they eventually happen upon like a ring of dead dogs, all the dogs in the town,
which they saw in a painting earlier.
Yes, and that had been previously described as kind of guardians against evil spirits. They all disappear in an earlier scene, and they're suddenly there. They're all like horribly like mutilated, and then they see this strange broken plinth, and they can't see anything like in it, but they like the guy's like pointing at it and screaming, and they turn the night vision on, and you see the missing little girl that has been taken, surrounded, like covered in dead children. Like they're like eating her flesh, or like
and there's like baby noises, which was also sort of built up, right?
Yeah, that was a very early on creepy detail that they kind of introduce and then don't mention again for ages. Like they find the sound recording and they maximize, enhance, and they get the baby voices from it, which is cool. I quite like the way they do that. Like they just speak into this really nerdy dude who's like
it's like another voice analysis for ghosts, I see.
yeah he's like, oh, and yes, if we do this, you can easily see here, like
if I put the anti-ghost filter on this track.
I don't know, I liked the kind of detail of him being quite sort of like a calm, scientific, like nerdy dude that wasn't very good in front of a camera. Like it just had like extra levels of nuance and detail to it. He wasn't acting, it didn't feel like acting to me. It was that, and that was great. But yeah, the film just goes bang, here is a young girl being eaten by ghost babies.
Is she being eaten by them?
I can't say. They were either eating her or kind of crawling all over her, or I don't know. It's a bizarre image, and it flashes on it for a moment, and you don't really know what you've seen. Then later it does kind of cut back to it in like a weird moment of editing where it like slows down on it and does like a weird like additional horror sting to a thing we've already seen, which I could take or leave, personally.
It has some weird moments like that kind of early on as well. There's like an early on kind of spooky moment where they first meet the sort of deranged, rude woman. Yeah. Who's like sort of the main antagonist behind the scenes, where they look back at the house and there's a kid looking out the window. Yeah. And it works well enough as a scare sort of spooky bit, and then they like replay it in slow motion.
Yeah, it does kind of undercut itself.
But when they did that at first, I thought that was going to be like part of the parody. But now it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know what? I guess it kind of works in that respect. But I don't know, it didn't feel as like signposted. But it didn't really bother me. But it's the sort of thing if a lesser film had pulled that out, I'd been all over. So I guess I'm looking on this quite favourably. I'm looking for the best in this film. Whereas if a film had actively been pissing me off the whole time and then pulled that stunt, I'd be like, are you kidding me? You're doing this as well. And then right at the end, we have like a sort of final reveal, which is that the young boy that has been living with the woman wasn't actually her child, but was in fact the physical manifestation of the demon. And for a split second in like a sort of submitted bit of home footage, which is the one moment of the film, if you think about the use of the camera makes no sense, but it's fine because it's creepy and it's
yeah, he's filming for a long time during a very traumatic experience.
Yeah, he's like, I've got to get this. The documentarian's really deeply ingrained in the back of his head. He just needs the shot. He needs the shot. No, so what happens is that the deranged guy like turns up at the door, comes in and demands to see the child. He realizes what the child is. He starts trying to attack the child, and as he's like hitting him in the face, there's this one like sort of frame on the camera where his face, the child's face, becomes the demon cursed mask face, which is cheesy.
Well, something also like appears by him, right? There's like this weird silhouette.
The silhouette of the dead girl who has been like the conduit in summoning the demon. Here's the thing with this scene is that, like I say with the previous one, I normally would chastise a film for doing this because I'm the sort of guy that loves the ambiguity in horror and, you know, that intensely psychological play on things. And yet, in this situation, I did kind of find it gratifying because it was like this kind of concrete answer to, at the very least, part of the mystery as to what was going on. But I don't know how you would feel about it, Rupert. I mean, I get the feeling you might not be as forgiving.
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong or right about a horror film choosing to be ambiguous and not answer any questions, or being pretty concrete and just showing you what happens. I think both can be good and both can be equally scary depending on how you do it. Right. I think the conflict I have with this film is that it feels like it kind of tries to do both.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to... This is kind of why it feels hard for me to explain, because there's elements of it that I really, really like, and like a lot of the stylistic stuff. The acting is pretty great across the board. I think it's like, it's all very naturalistic in like a very believable way. It's not like, you know, Oscar-worthy stuff or anything, but like everything is as it should be, and you can get immersed into it like very quickly because it's so well executed. I guess it's almost unique in how much it tries to have its cake and eat it in terms of it wants to show you this stuff. It wants to be kind of in your face spooky in this scene, and it is quite disturbing, but it also spends a lot of time sort of on this more ominous, you know, what is going on here stuff. But then we'll also have like a sort of, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but you know, we'll have scenes of sort of essentially just exposition kind of explaining stuff, where it sort of goes into the lore of like the people used to do this ritual where they did this and they held out the string and they clapped. I guess I just kind of felt like, on top of the presentation being quite scattershot, and then what the film is trying to sort of go for in terms of how it feels to experience, it just felt quite obtuse in a way, which normally I feel like I would like. So I don't really know why I didn't like it more. I didn't hate it. I still think this film is really interesting, and I think it's really good in a lot of ways. And I'm kind of quite keen to rewatch it actually, because I feel like there's probably bits and details that I probably missed when I first watched it. And the final sequence is probably... I wasn't a huge fan of it, honestly. It's actually quite an impressive sort of one take. There's like when his wife sets herself on fire.
Oh, true.
I don't know how they. Well,
actually, that was a clever thing they did, where they had the inbuilt sort of screen tearing in the camera, or like the digital
which they actually
like
set up before as well, so that was quite clever.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't just suddenly happen in one moment. It was like throughout the scene, like the camera gets dropped, I think, and it starts sort of flickering, and then you get...
Well, they also, when they're speaking with the schizophrenic guy for the first time, he has like a freak out and the camera starts like...
Oh, yeah.
Fragmenting, and like the audio goes,
Yeah, and the implication is it's like the paranormal interference is like having some effect. So yeah, in the frames where there's like kind of pixels being covered up or obscured, that's probably when they like put the actress in like some, you know, they did all the fire stunts. Yeah, no, that was really well executed.
But it did feel incredibly convoluted because it was like so many elements just sort of suddenly coming together.
Yes, well that's the thing, is that the scene, it feels like it was its big kind of twist trump card right at the end, to be like, previously to that, the film kind of ends what you think. That scene almost acts as an epilogue in a way, where the film ends and it's like, and after this, the documentarian has gone missing. His family home is burned down and he has not been seen. And it's like, okay, well that's how the film begins, so that's how the film is going to end. And then it goes, but we have this special footage that was just sent in, and then you get the scene. And so yeah, it does seem to kind of draw everything to a conclusion in the space of about 30 seconds. And I should have a problem with that, and yet I don't. I found it to be really oddly satisfying. That's my conflict here, is that in a worse film I would find that desperately cliched, really tacky, and a really poor way of handling things. But because I was so invested in the film up until this point, I was really, really eager for more. So when it was like, psych, that's not the ending, here's more, I was kind of elated. And, you know, kid with spooky demon face should be goofy as hell. But I was like, yeah, you know what? Fair enough. I'm into it. Let's go.
No, yeah, I feel that. I mean, you know, sometimes, you know, a film, it just kind of gets you from the start. So,
yeah,
you know, you could make more excuses for it. I mean, I've definitely done that. You know, we look back at, what was it, Malignant, you know,
no,
some people.
true.
you see, the thing is, Adam, sometimes people have taste and, you know, they can't help it.
Wait, so you're saying in this case, I have taste and you don't?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay, well, you know what? That will bring us on to ratings. What would you give Noroi the Curse?
It's like between a 6 and a 7.
Okay.
I don't know. I feel like I probably just need to watch it again because it was not what I was expecting, and you know, I was not expecting something that normal in the first place. So, yeah, I between there. Okay. I liked it. I feel like I'd probably need to revisit it to really set my thoughts on it.
Sure.
What did you think?
Well, as you can tell by this point, I was very much taken by it. I would give this an 8.5 out of 10. I really, really was just completely glued to my screen watching this, which even with good films isn't necessarily a guarantee. Sometimes they, you know, I will be distracted by something or other at some point, but this, I was like, I need to be here, I need to see what happens next. The way I thought the editing was fantastic, the use of form, as we've mentioned, just elevated the subgenre to a point where I don't think another film in the genre has been as creative. Performance is fantastic. The horror builds so effectively so that when you do get those final sort of horror stings at the end, they feel so earned and they feel really satisfying, in spite of the fact that I might have preferred something more ambiguous. The fact that I got something concrete felt very gratifying. I highly recommend this to anyone who's even remotely interested in J-horror, and even to those that are just generally interested in horror movies. This is...
I don't think I'd recommend this as a J-horror starter though.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, I guess you'd have had that. You have to perhaps have a bit of like a foundation in both horror and J-horror. But if you're a horror fan, because this is the thing, this film, I'd never heard of it before you added it to this list. So I think this has kind of gone under the radar for a lot of people, certainly me. And if that's the case for you, 100% check this film out. I don't think it would disappoint, at least in, you know, really creating that sinister atmosphere. And that said, if you're not into atmospheric horror films, if you want more like kind of, you know, visceral, in your face stuff, maybe not. But I think that basically wraps it up. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you liked it, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. If you disliked the video, give it a dislike, and we will catch you again next time for more spooky content, film content, reaction content, whatever it might be. I've been Adam.
I've been Rupert.
And we'll see you again soon. Peace.
Peace.